by state as folks did in Wisconsin and Michigan in the last couple of years.
Obviously, no one can predict what those 9 folks in the Supreme Court building will decide to hear or not hear. That is completely up to them, and we've been surprised in years past by things they have chosen to hear and by things they've chosen to take a pass on. But this seems like a very important issue, and it seems, I realize I'm biased, but it seems to me like a no-brainer that you can't force, you should not be able to force a public school teacher to join a union that is spending money expressing things that teacher doesn't believe in. That just seems like a black and white First Amendment issue to me.
Well, that's right. But we're, as you said, we don't know what the court's going to do until they do it. But we do have some encouraging news here because there have been 2 recent cases in the last 2 years where the court has come close to this issue. And in each of those instances, Justice Alito wrote an opinion in which he said there's a real problem here. There's a real First Amendment issue about compelling teachers or public employees to pay dues. We need to re-look at this question. And so what we have is the court asking for a case that brings this issue to it. And in fact, when we read those opinions, that's when this case got off the ground. We said, okay, if that's what the court wants, let's bring that case to the court and settle this once and for all. So we have some pretty good indications that the court is interested in this and that there's possibly a majority of justices that are willing to agree with us. So we're optimistic, but as you say, we won't know for sure until the court actually votes on this and actually decides what it's going to do.
I have been accused of being too optimistic sometimes, but I will tell you, if the court chooses to hear this, I don't see this as a 5-4 decision. This court has been pleasantly surprised, especially last session, very surprising on a number of issues where the majority was much larger. It was 7-2, 9-0. I don't know that this would be a 9-0, but I don't see this as a tight one-person swing vote issue. I think the issues are fairly cut and dried here. And I mentioned First Amendment because I know in the mainstream media they will paint this as an anti-union case. And while the result may be detrimental to unions, that's really not what this is about. It is about the First Amendment.
That's exactly right. This is not anti-union. If we win, the California Teachers Association will still be the designated collective bargaining agent for the teachers in California. We are not diminishing the union's authority in any way, shape, or form. What we are saying is that individual teachers, individual employees, have a First Amendment right to decide for themselves whether to pay dues to this organization. So if we win, we'll make the union into the same thing that every other professional organization in the country is like. You know, the ABA, the AMA, all represent the interests of an entire profession, but they can't get the state to compel every member of that profession to pay dues. They have to compete for those dues. So the union will still be the collective bargaining agent, but it will be accountable to its members. It will have to compete for dues from its members. And if it takes positions that the members support, they will continue to support the union with their dues. If it continues to pursue an agenda that's totally at odds with a majority or a significant minority, at least, of its member employees, it will lose dues. But we don't know in advance how this is going to work out. All we're saying is that under the Constitution, individuals have the right to decide this for themselves, and once they have that right, it's up to the union to compete for those dues, just like any other professional organization.
Terry Pell is my guest. He's the president of the Center for Individual Rights. They are helping, 10 teachers out there in California? 10 that are...
10 teachers, that's exactly right.
And then there's an organization out there, a Christian organization, that is also involved in this case. But you guys are, from the legal standpoint, you're kind of spearheading the effort to try to get it in front of the Supreme Court.
That's exactly right. We approached the Christian Educators International Association. They contacted some of their members, and that's really how this case got off the ground. But as you mentioned before, really this is going to settle the issue for everybody across the board, across the entire nation.
Terry, let me ask you this, because when I was in high school, I was in debate club, and I did very well, and one of the reasons I did well was I would always, if you ever competed in debate, they have you prepare for both sides of the debate. They tell you what the topic will be. They do not tell you in advance which side you will be taking, so you have to understand both sides of the issue. And I always found that to be very helpful, whether it was in radio, whether that was in politics, whatever I was involved in. If I had a clear understanding of the opposition side, it helped me clarify my argument that much better. What is the argument that the unions will be making why they should be able to force people to join if those folks don't want to?
Well, they're going to rely on a 1976 case where the Supreme Court went the other way. And the basic argument is that the union represents the interests of everybody. Therefore, it's only fair to ask everybody to pay dues to the union to support that representation. And that might have made sense in 1976 when the union more or less did represent the interests of everybody. But in the last 25 years, as you know and I know and basically everybody knows, the union leadership has become much more political in the issues that it pursues. And so now there is a significant minority, and in some cases even a majority, of teachers who just fundamentally disagree with the positions the teachers' union takes, not just the political positions it takes, but the positions it takes in collective bargaining. And that's where the First Amendment issue arises here. Once you have a case where the union leadership is taking positions that are at odds, fundamentally at odds, with the political beliefs of the members, it's no longer the case that the state can just assume that it's all right to collect dues from these people on the theory that the union is actually representing their interests. The union isn't representing their interests, and it's up to the individual to decide one way or the other what their interests are and whether they think the union represents those interests.
It's the ultimate test of personal responsibility. Do I believe this is in my best interest?
That's exactly right. And, our clients, for example, are totally opposed to the positions the union's taking on things like teacher tenure and school choice. Our clients believe that, there should be more school choice, and the tenure laws ought to be toughened up a little bit so that teachers don't automatically get tenure, because they see firsthand what happens when a bad teacher gets in the classroom and is protected by the tenure laws and can never be fired. So these are issues that teachers disagree about. And if they, under those circumstances, the teachers have a right to decide for themselves whether to join the union. They certainly should not be forced to support a union that is diametrically opposed to their views on things like tenure and school choice.
Terry, final question for you, and that is from a practical standpoint. You're putting this petition in front of the court. What is the timing in which they will decide whether or not to hear the case in next year's cycle?
We should hear in April or May. They'll meet, they have their Friday conferences, and they'll discuss this and, whatever other petitions are pending, and we'll just get a decision at that point whether they're even going to take the case.
Very good. Well, when that comes around, I hope we can sit down again, chat some more. I always enjoy talking with you.
Look forward to it. Thanks so much for having me.
Terry Pell, thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
You're listening to the Capitol Hill Show with the voice of reason, Tim Constantine.
Well, of course, we couldn't make it through an entire day without letting you know our little history lesson as well. I like to take a look back every single day at what occurred on this day in history. It's a look back at the calendar day of today, in this case, January 29th, and what happened on it through, did I say that already? All right, fire it up for me, would you?
And now it's time for This Day in History.
Let me clarify that for you just a minute. This day in history, we take a look back on this calendar date, in this case, January 29th, throughout history. Maestro, if I could have a little history music, please. Thank you very much, kind sir. It was this day, January 29th, in the year 1861, that Kansas was admitted as the 34th state in the Union. 1926 was the year. It was this day, January 29th, when Violet Neatley Anderson became the first African-American woman admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court. 1942 was the year. It was this day when German and Italian troops took Benghazi in North Africa. 37 civilians were killed by a United States helicopter attack on this day in 1967 in Vietnam. 1979, it was January 29th, that Jimmy Carter commuted the sentence of Patty Hearst. It was this day in 1984 that President Ronald Reagan announced he would run for a second term, and that concludes today's... Pete, someday I'm going to get the timing right on this. I promise. That concludes today's history lesson on this day, January 29th, the year of our Lord, 2016.
The Capitol Hill Show.
All right, now, I promised at the beginning of the show we would discuss a little bit about... Yes, it is. Pete just asked me, by the way, is that my coach? You remember the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer show? Every Christmas, CBS, they still play it now, but you can buy it on DVD. But when I was a little kid, the claymation version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and they would say, the coach, the gentleman who was teaching the baby reindeer, the little boy reindeer, how to fly, so that someday they might lead Santa's sleigh, says, all right, Rudolph. And every now and again, involuntarily, I throw out, all right, and then I go on. And Pete ribs me every time and says, wait a minute, where's Rudolph? Where's Rudolph? All right, we had a discussion at the top of the hour, and that I promised that I would have a discussion about the fact that the Republicans... All right, I promised a discussion on whether or not the Republicans would go ahead and actually uphold their promises. What are you talking about? Well, if you remember just, 60 days ago, there was an election. A little more than that now, I guess. All right, I'm sorry, 80 days ago, there was an election. And the Republicans all fall ran against President Obama. The entire immigration issue baffles me for the following reason. For whatever reason, pundits believe that this is the key. People want to push amnesty for the millions of people that are in the United States illegally. And yet most of America does not want amnesty. The vast majority of Americans do not support this. And yet politicians keep falling for it. Either there is an agenda going on behind the scenes that I am completely naive to, or they're just not that bright. And it might be both. It might be both. But do you remember literally the day after Election Day, when Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama, the hired guns, the paid guys in the Republican Party all came out and said publicly, well, we've got to get in favor of immigration reform and amnesty just so we can get the Latino vote. And I'm thinking, first of all, that's not going to happen. If you pass that, they're not suddenly going to vote Republican. All right, that part I don't buy. But secondly, even if it were true, how, discreet is that? Hi, we just want your vote, so we're going to go ahead and give you what you want. All last year, before I even get to that, a couple of years ago, Marco Rubio, it's almost 2 years ago now, Marco Rubio came out with a gang of 8. At the time, Marco Rubio was seen by many. His face was on the cover of Time magazine. Is this the savior of the GOP? There was a movement to draft Marco Rubio. He's the future of the party. He's great. Look, he's young, he's bright, he's conservative. As it turned out, Marco Rubio wasn't quite as conservative as some people thought. Now, I'm from Florida. I knew this. I remember when he was a state legislator. I remember what it was that he voted on, voted for, voted in favor of, what he allowed to go to the floor and not. I remember all of that. So I'm not stunned. I was not shocked, but a lot of people were. And so Marco Rubio, when he embraced immigration and amnesty for these folks, he went from being at the top of these various presidential polls to extinguished. I mean, literally, he didn't show up on most of the polls anymore. And so I thought, golly, if they don't get it, amnesty is not going to be a popular item. This is not how you get elected. If you enforce the law, if you want to change the law, go ahead. Get a majority of the Congress, the United States Congress, to do it. But the law of the land right now says if someone comes here illegally, they are to be sent back from wherever it is they come from, unless they have some compelling reason that they have been tortured or are under some sort of problem. They are in imminent danger when they return to their homeland. That is not the case with 99.9% of illegal